Hey everybody, good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Hopefully it's a little bit warmer in here than it is out there. If not, just scoot your seat closer. I don't know. We probably don't want to do that. Anyway, you remember paint by number? Remember those? I think they're still around, but they're this interesting concept that I think can be very misleading. Here's why. Because they make people who don't know how to paint feel like they do know how to paint. And here's how they do it. They take a picture and suck all of the color out of it, and then they break it up into all of these little parts, and they put a number in the middle of all of those little parts. And then they give you this key off to the side of the painting, and each of the numbers in the picture is represented by a color in that key. So 1 is red. And what you do is everywhere you see a red or a 1 in that picture, you color it red. And it can be a small spot, a big spot, a medium spot. And anywhere you see a 2, you put pink, or 3, a beige, or whatever color that would be, so on and so forth. And if you do all of those little parts with the right colors in the right places, then eventually you end up with a masterpiece. That's pretty. But here's the thing. Never have I ever had something turn out that good. Somehow they always continue to look like a third grader painted the bird. Not that magic thing. I don't know where that came from. And where it started was at the very beginning when you have the notebook or the box. Maybe it's a puzzle if you do puzzles. And you're looking at the cover and it's overwhelming to try and figure out how am I going to get to that picture with what I have to work with. Right? It just feels daunting. It's beautiful and it's perfect and it's all put together and it's shaded and it's faded and it's all of the other things that make art art. And you just have a paintbrush with some paint. And somehow you're supposed to make it all look that way with just what you have. That's hard. It reminds me of life, really. Life in general. Because you are bombarded every single day of your life with some promise. Some picture of what life is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to feel. And somehow, some way, in all of those pictures, everyone is smiling. Take work, for instance. Right? Someone sold us a line on work and what that's supposed to be like. We wrapped it up in this nice package called the American Dream. And this is how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to walk out of your perfect little house and look at your white picket fence out at the end of your yard, say goodbye to your 2.5 children, and you get into your nice car, and you drive to your office where everything is exactly how it's supposed to be, and you walk in saying hi to everyone, right and left, and they're cheering for you as you walk in, and you make lots of money. That's the picture of work that we're given. But I don't know that that's reality. Reality is we're working our tails off. And we got a job description when we started there, and it was like syllabus shock. I'm supposed to do all of this in 40 hours? And we can just go, how am I supposed to accomplish that? Or how am I supposed to create that reality when all I have is what I have? Same thing with family. You can't watch a sitcom or a drama anymore on TV without getting the impression that your family is no fun. It's amazing to me on a sitcom how even in the midst of an argument, people are laughing. There's no one laughing at my house when we're in an argument, I hate to tell you. Where does that come from? We get this picture of what a family's supposed to. Everybody sits at the table, right, and eats politely and doesn't make a mess, and they go on vacation, and everybody smiles, and no one fights, and no one complains, and no one whines. They have not been on vacation with my family. Your family probably doesn't look like the picture that someone sold us for what a family's supposed to look like. Same thing with the world, right? My least favorite activity anymore is turning on the news. When you hear about the third shooting in a week, around here it's in a day, in an hour. When you hear about starving children and wars and all of that kind of stuff, it's an overwhelming thing. But someone told us that we're supposed to have peace around the world, and all the children of the world will gather around and hold hands and they'll sing a song. Where is that? And getting there seems virtually impossible. Because again, someone gave us a picture or an image of what it was supposed to look like, and we look at what we have at our disposal and go, how? We're overwhelmed. It's just like the color by number, and that is the genius of it. Because you don't start with a finished product. You don't even start with one section filled in. It's blank. And so you choose your first number. Let's say it's number 4. And you focus on number 4, and you find all of those 4s, and you paint all of those 4s orange. And you just do that until there's no more 4s that are needed to be painted. And then you might move on to number 7, and that's supposed to be green or something. And you do it one piece at a time. One little section, one color. And if you do that long enough and faithfully enough, in the end you end up with a picture that's more than what you thought you were capable of. And I think that that is the story of Joseph. I think Joseph's life is this long series of moments, not all of them easy, in fact, most of them difficult. But Joseph seems to have this ability to tackle those moments by moment. And oftentimes has no idea what's down the road. He has no idea what God is doing in his life, because if he put all of the pieces together, it would all seem random. And it would probably seem like God isn't doing anything with his life. But Joseph understood what his number was, and every time it comes up, he paints. So let's just start from the beginning and where we've been in this life of Joseph. It starts right with he's dad's favorite. His brothers are jealous. His brothers throw him in the bottom of a well, and then they sell him off to a foreign land, and he ends up in Potiphar's house, right? And that doesn't go well. And what happens as a result, Potiphar throws Joseph in prison. That's the end of chapter 39. Joseph's in prison. But here's an amazing thing that happens. In just a few short days, Joseph is put in charge of the prison. So this theme that we're going to come back to over and over again of there being more God in every situation than we think, that is Joseph. There's more color in every picture than you might see at first. And so he gets put in prison. He's put in charge of the prison. And lo and behold, 2 gentlemen are thrown into prison with him. Now, this is going to sound like a fairy tale, but it's why we make movies about Joseph's life. He's in prison, and the king's cupbearer and baker are put in jail with him. Again, that sounds like the beginning of a Disney movie. But this is actual history. And so these guys get put in prison with him. And Joseph, in the middle of all of his craziness that is his life, trying to figure out, where is God leading me? What is God doing? Why does everything seem to be going wrong for me? A very curious thing happens. If you've got your Bible, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 40. Genesis 40. And I want to start at just the second half of verse 4. It says this: after they had been in custody, they being the baker and the cupbearer, for some time, each of the 2 men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night. And each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" I'm profoundly struck by that. Because again, we're talking about a guy who has a lot of stuff going on. I mean, Christy mentioned baggage that we all bring in here with us. The week that's gone by, or the things that you're anticipating ahead of you, not many of us can say. We're sold by our brothers. They contemplated murdering us in cold blood. And then the rest of the story that we've heard. I mean, Joseph has a crazy situation on his hands, and here he is sitting in the middle of jail, and somehow, some way, he notices, he sees that they are dejected. is able to see someone else in the midst of his own struggle. And what I think is when he sees that they're sad and he asks them, why do you look so sad? He's noticing an opportunity. I think Joseph understands God just put up his number and says, hey, I know that things haven't been going well, but I'm giving you an opportunity here to forge a relationship with some important people. And I imagine that in that Joseph had, again, no concept, maybe wasn't thinking at all about where it could lead or what it could become. But he's faithful in the moment to interact with those people right where they're at. And it continues on. They say, we both had dreams, but there's no one to interpret them. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Joseph seizes the opportunity. And he does this really cool thing in that he takes what seems like randomness and infuses it with God. He notices that he's got this chance to share with these gentlemen that God is more in their situation than they tend to think. You see, it was like God said, okay, 4, Joseph goes on it. I got this. And again, has no concept of where this is going to go or what's going to become of it. But he understands that in this moment, God has given him this thing to do with these people at this time. And he gets this concept that we're going to come back to over and over and over again this morning. And I think if you and I could begin to live by this motto, we would see life in a totally different shade. And here's the principle. It's less about seeing the whole picture than it is seeing your part. It's less about seeing the whole picture than it is seeing your part. Over and over again, Joseph has no ability to see what God is doing and where God is taking him. But there's these series of moments and opportunities where Joseph knows what his part is supposed to be. And so he begins this conversation with the cupbearer and the baker. And the cupbearer shares his dream with Joseph. And it's this very peculiar, weird dream, like your dreams probably are. I mean, dreams are weird. How our brains take all the different parts of our life and mash them into this matrix kind of world is just beyond me. But that's kind of what happens here too. And the cupbearer has no idea what it means. Joseph listens to the dream and interprets the dream for him. And what's cool is it's good news for the cupbearer. The meaning of his dream is essentially you're going to be restored to the king. You're going to be restored to Pharaoh and everything's going to be made right. You're going to get your old job back and it's all going to be really, really good. And it could have ended there, but again, Joseph is constantly looking for what God might be doing in seemingly mundane situations. So he interprets this dream, says the cupbearer, got good news for you. And then in verse 14, he jumps on an opportunity and says, but when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here, I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. I love that Joseph does not miss a beat. And he says, cupbearer, it's good news. Now, with that good news, can you do me a favor? Can you put in a good word for me with Pharaoh? Mention me to him. Because I've been unjustly treated. I've been put in prison for a crime that I did not commit. Can you help me out? Now, this is different from how a lot of us would have maybe done it. I don't know about you, but chances are at some point I would have just thrown my hands in the air and gone, well, God must just not want a whole lot of good for me in my life. And I would have been the one sitting in the corner feeling sorry for myself. But not Joseph. He sees this moment that God's presented to him. And he gets in the cupbearer's ear. And that doesn't have immediate dividends, but it pays off. We'll get to that in a minute. Because the baker hears this good news about the cupbearer and goes, awesome, I had a very similar dream. Can you tell me the news for me, please? And unfortunately, it's not good news for the baker. For the cupbearer, you're going to be restored. For the baker, you're going to be impaled. Very different news. Probably was the end of that conversation. And then it all happens. The baker stops baking. And the cupbearer gets his job back and goes back working for Pharaoh. What's peculiar, given the nature that what seems like a fairy tale story here, is that the cupbearer totally forgets about Joseph. He gets out of jail, goes about his business, and mentions nothing to Pharaoh until Pharaoh has a dream. Once we get into chapter 41, in verse 1, it says, when 2 years had passed, 2 years. Again, I've read this story several times, and I've never thought about the fact that all that cool stuff happens in the jail, and then it's 2 whole years later until anything comes of it. But Pharaoh has a dream. He wakes up and he's freaked out. He goes back to sleep. He has another dream. It's equally as freaky. So he wakes up and he's all distraught, and he's asking everybody around him, help me understand what's happening here. Why am I having these dreams? What does it mean? What's someone trying to tell me? And somehow in there, a light bulb goes off for the cupbearer. And he goes, Pharaoh, remember 2 years ago when you threw me in jail? I met this Hebrew kid in there. And one night I had a dream, and I told him about my dream, and he interpreted it for me, and it all came true. You should talk to him. In fact, I just remembered. He told me to mention him to you. And so Pharaoh, desperate for answers, makes a call. And in verse 14 of chapter 41, it says, so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Now stop right there. Because again, if this were you or I, and we got a call that the king of Egypt wanted to see us, there'd be 2 things going through my head. Number 1, I'm probably about to die. Number 2, I am going to look as gaunt and beat up and hungry and dirty and unshaven and unkept as I possibly can, so that when I walk in there, Pharaoh goes, you poor soul. We need to get you out of that jail. That's how I would have thought. Not Joseph. Pharaoh wants to see me real quick. Let me put on some good clothes and get a good shave. Why? Because Joseph saw his number was up. This wasn't some random circumstance. This wasn't just mundane or life just happening. Joseph understood God is doing something. I don't understand it. I don't know where this is headed, but I am going to have an audience with the king of Egypt here. I'm going to look nice. I'm going to dress nice. And it's as if Joseph is treating this meeting as a job interview, which it kind of becomes. But what Joseph is showing again is that it's less about seeing the whole picture than it is about seeing your part. Again, I don't know that Joseph had any understanding of what God was doing. But he knew that in this moment, at this time, in this place, God had given him an opportunity. And so he was going to make the most of it. It says in verse 15 then, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I've heard it said that you, when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And get what Joseph says next. This is not what he's supposed to say. I can't do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Wouldn't you think Joseph would want to look good and flashy and important and needed and be like, oh yeah, I'm a pro at dream interpretation. Here's my card. Instead, he says, I can't do it. Because somewhere deep inside Joseph, he understands this is not about him. This is about God, and God's overarching sovereign providential plan. And so instead of trying to make himself good, he makes God look good. That's what we call glorifying God. And he infuses the situation with color that no one saw coming. But that's what he does, because that's his part. Doesn't understand why. I don't know that he had laid out all what God was going to do. He just knew that given this opportunity with that question, he knew what he was supposed to respond with. You see, it's not about understanding the whole picture. It's about understanding and seeing your part. And so Pharaoh explains his dream to Joseph, both dreams actually. And Joseph says they're one and the same dream actually. And here's the interpretation. You get bad news, but you also get some good news. It's both for you. You see, what your dream means is that there's going to be 7 really good years here in Egypt, but they're going to be followed by 7 years of famine. That's what God is trying to tell you in this moment. Now, I don't know what went through Pharaoh's mind, but I know what was going through Joseph's. Opportunity. My number's up. God's calling on me to respond. In this moment, he's giving me an opportunity. Look at what he does in verse 32. He says, "The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man, and put him in charge of the land of Egypt." If ever there were an opportunist, it's Joseph. Pharaoh, things are going to go downhill real quick. You need a wise, discerning guy to help you do this. Don't know if you noticed, but I'm pretty clean-shaven and well-dressed. He sees the window. He's tuned in enough. He's receptive enough to what God is doing that he jumps. You see, it's not about understanding the whole picture. It's not about seeing the whole picture. It's just about seeing your part. Again, when Joseph opens his mouth to say those last few words, I don't know that he knew exactly what God was going to do with it. He just knew what he needed to say. And he lays out this plan for Pharaoh, and he says, this is what I would do. And as Pharaoh's listening, the wheels are turning, and God is doing what only God can do. And in verse 38, it says this, 39. It says, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there's no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." What did you just say? Did you just say, Pharaoh, that I'm going to be number 2 in Egypt, the most powerful nation at the time? Did you just say that I'm going to wear your signet ring and that people are going to listen to me and you're going to be the only one more powerful than me? And all of a sudden, all of those random pieces of Joseph's life to this point fall into place. And he sees that God had been leading him here. Now, way back at the bottom of that well, when he was with his brothers and they had thrown him in there, and he's sitting down there, I don't know that he would have believed if someone had jumped down there and said, "Hey, Joseph, I know it seems bad right now, but in about a decade, you're going to be the most powerful person on earth except for one person." I don't know that Joseph would have believed that. And I certainly believe Joseph would have gone, "You want that? You're saying that's going to be the reality when here I am with just this? Just me? These realities?" But I don't think Joseph looked at the end result or worried about the end result or the big picture. He just went moment by moment by moment by moment as God led and directed him. It's not about seeing the whole picture. It's just about seeing your part. Joseph was the very first paint-by-number artist. God, I believe, had this great picture of a man's life that people would talk about forever. I think that God understood he was going to create a story in this man's life that in 2016, thousands of people would be talking about because of the example that Joseph gave. But Joseph only understood cistern, sold, Potiphar, jail, baker, cupbearer, Pharaoh. He only went a beat at a time. And it's the difference between number thinking and picture thinking. So many of us do picture thinking. We want to know it all. We want to know what's around every bend and every corner. We want to know what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And a lot of us can be immobilized by fear of not knowing. But I think the example of Joseph is one beat at a time. One square. Color that square. We'll move on to the next one. And if you're faithful long enough and you're consistent long enough, I'm going to create something in the end that you couldn't even imagine, but you've got to be faithful in this minute. Because I am creating a masterpiece. But you've got to know I'm the artist. You're the instrument. There's another way to think about this, and right now I'm going to reveal something about myself that in the eyes of a lot of high school and middle school students will eliminate any chance I have of being cool. One of my passions in life is orchestra music. I don't listen to a lot of like radio stuff. I listen to like movie soundtracks and weird stuff like that because I grew up playing trombone in the band, and I was in band from like 4th grade all the way through high school. And thanks. I feel supported. And so I really got into this kind of music, and along these same tracks, it helped me understand that there's a difference between note thinking and song thinking. And here's what I mean by that. When you sit and you listen to an orchestra play a song, it's very complex. It's very overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff happening. And if you were going to try and do that by yourself, there'd be no way to pull it off. Because here's the crazy thing about being a part of an orchestra. You spend a lot of time not playing your instrument. Seriously. You sit down at a concert, and the conductor picks up his baton or her baton, and you sit there. Because there's maybe only a few people that are going to play at the beginning. And what you do is you sit and you wait and you count. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4. And you might do that for 15 measures. And then pretty soon there's one note that you got to hit on the second beat of the measure. Bam! And now you're resting. And you're just waiting again. But you got to hit that right note in that right place at that right time with the right pitch. And if everybody in the orchestra does that at the right time and at the right place, incredible things result. I want to show you an example. I want to show you a video of one of my favorite songs. It's called Rhapsody in Blue. It'll sound familiar to you. You're going to be tempted to watch the people playing the instrument. But I want you to watch the people behind the people playing the instrument, the rest of the orchestra, because most of them aren't doing anything. Watch. See that guy? He's not doing anything. See the trumpet laying on the seat? What are they doing? Get ready, because everybody's been waiting and counting and preparing for their note. And in a minute, everyone's going to play together. about that cymbal player. If he's not counting right and waiting for his note, this isn't the same song. And here's what's happening next. The conductor is also playing the piano. And for the next couple minutes, he's going to play the piano, and virtually everyone else is going to watch. But they're not just sitting there. They're anticipating. And they're waiting. And they're looking at a sheet of music that right now has a line and probably about a 15 up on top of it saying, you're going to wait for 15 measures. But when that 15th measure is up, you are going to play this note. And it's going to sound amazing. But you've got to wait for that moment, for that opportunity. And this song, I think, is about 12 minutes long. We're not going to listen to the whole thing this morning. Thanks, guys. But that's what's cool about music. That's what's cool about painting by number, is that you don't have to be able to do everything. You don't have to understand the whole. You just have to know your part. And reality is with God, he's doing way more complex, bigger, kind of cosmic things that you and I have no ability to understand. All we can understand is our part in this minute at this time. And so this is what I want to encourage us to be doing in the next week or month or years of our lives, is become the kind of people that live by the moment, moment to moment. Too many people are tempted to live life to life, right? I want to know everything and have it all figured out, and I'm going to have a plan, and I'm going to stick to that plan, and I'm not going to waver. But if we became people who are just moment to moment, instead of worrying about what's happening next Sunday, we just worried about this Sunday, it could be different. So this is what it might look like. When you're living life every day and God taps you on the shoulder and throws your number up and he says, color red, you color red. And that might be at Target when you're in line and you can see that that cashier is having a rough day, and you know what Jesus would do. Or it might be when you're at home and God says, I want you to paint an orange. And you paint an orange. Because you know that God has given you a family to be the caretaker of and the discipler of. And so you seize that opportunity moment to moment. Or maybe God calls you to paint in yellow and you paint in yellow. Or maybe it's green and you paint in green. And God says, I want you to give. And you go, God, but I don't know that I'll be able to pay my other bills at the end of the month if I give that right now. That's not the problem. Because God's not, he doesn't want, he'll worry about the picture. You worry about your part right here, right now. Or maybe God's going to call you to paint in blue, and so you paint in blue, or maybe even in purple, and you paint in purple. You see, the point is, you can't do all of that at the same time. But so many of us try. So many of us would be sitting at the bottom of the well, and we would try and grasp all of that and try and do it all at the same time. And God says, I just need you to do this now. And if you will trust me long enough and consistently enough, you will see the incredible masterpiece that I'm creating. You see, it's not about seeing the whole picture. It's about seeing your part. One of the verses that we'll come to over and over again over the course of this series, because I want you to see that Joseph's life is not just this random story that you find in the Old Testament, but that he is this living example of who Jesus called us to be. And right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, in chapter 5, verse 16, Jesus says this, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. That's what Joseph did. Every time he had the opportunity, he glorified God. He responded how he was supposed to respond in the minute. And eventually, God brought all of the pieces together and it revealed to him what he'd been doing all along. And in a few chapters, picture gets even bigger, and the colors get even more vibrant and more beautiful. But what it requires of you and me, what it required of Joseph, was to understand that we are not the artist. We're just the instrument. We're just the trombone waiting for our note. We're just the paintbrush waiting to apply the right color in the right spot at the right moment. And what God does is orchestrates all of that together to create a masterpiece. That's what Paul called it in Ephesians chapter 2. Part of this redemptive story that Jesus was at the center of, for we are God's masterpiece. He's created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. You see, Jesus drew the picture, and he said, I'm going to call on them to put orange right there at that time. And them, I'm going to ask to put blue right there. And them, purple right there. And along the way, I'm going to do what only I can do. And make something of what seems like a mess. I'm going to create art that no one could imagine. That's the best part about God, is that he knows how to do that, and we don't. And so we need to become people who trust and are okay with being less about the big picture, more about our part, and responding accordingly. Let's pray. Father, I don't get this most of the time. I mess it up. And I know I'm not the only one. I know that for a lot of us, we understand this idea conceptually, but when it comes to living it out, we're tempted to want to know the whole picture and understand how it's all going to work together, and are we going to be okay, and is the bottom line going to be right? But you so often call us to step out in faith. And sometimes that faith looks simply like loving someone when we don't feel like loving them. Sometimes it's giving when we don't think we have it. Sometimes it's just giving a kind word to someone that's having a bad day. Sometimes it's very simple. Sometimes it requires us to love a spouse who's done some very unlovable things. Sometimes it requires us to be patient as we wait for you to provide a job for us. Sometimes it requires us to pray fervently for our child that's not close to you. And trust that your picture that you're creating is bigger than our little place, but that we are called to be faithful in our little place. So, Lord, help us to be moment-living people. Help us to be attentive and receptive and responsive to when you call us to move, we do it. Not worried about what's next, just right now. We love you with everything that we are. In Jesus' name, amen.